Muse have given me a lot of pleasure over the years, so I'm going to enjoy talking through their catalogue and setting out their records in order. And this video is really inspired by how much I've enjoyed their latest album, Will of the People, which I'd say is the most fun album they've released for about 20 years, if not ever. Muse are of course a dramatic alternative rock trio from the UK, led by Matt Bellamy, who is one of the world's greatest heroes, I would say. And following that comprehensive introduction, we can get straight to the list. So at number 9, because there are 9 albums as at today's date, it's Simulation Theory, their 8th album from 2018. And if you look at the album cover and listen to the first track, you would think it's an all-out synthwave record, which isn't quite the case, but it is very retro and full of electronics. The best tracks are that first track, Algorithm, then there's a great track towards the end called Blockades, which I always look forward to, but the standout is The Dark Side, the second track, which is all-time top 5 Muse and endlessly repeatable. And if you've got the special edition of the CD or access to the internet, there is an alternative version of The Dark Side which is also definitely worth checking out. But the other songs aren't quite strong enough to lift this from last place. They're quite quirky in many ways. And I'm also marking this down because of how often you recognise other people's music. Now they do this on pretty much every album, but this one must be the worst offender. I heard Freedom by George Michael, A Little Respect by Erasure, High and Dry by Radiohead, that drum pattern, 2 Times by Ann Lee, if you remember that track. And actually the solo on The Dark Side is what I would describe as an interpretation of the solo from I Want to Break Free by Queen, and I'll probably say Queen again at some point in this video, but the bottom line is that Simulation Theory has a few great songs but is ultimately an outlier record, so goes in the 9th position. Number 8 will be the 3rd album, Absolution, which I believe is fully front-loaded and has no songs in the second half that I'd put the album on for. The closest is Endlessly, but that's a low-key track, so it's more one I would enjoy when the album's already on than get off the shelf for. And I would also say this is the album I play the least these days, probably because of how I feel about the second half. Even Hysteria, I never got into that song, which may put me in the pariah minority, but I don't want to undersell how strong the first half of the album is. You've got the short intro, then it's Apocalypse Please, which always sounded to me like the opening track of a musical, then a classic single with Time Is Running Out, very much archetypal early Muse, that song, then Sing for Absolution, one of the better slow songs from the early days, and then album highlight Stockholm Syndrome, which is all-time top 5 Muse, maybe the band's greatest opening riff. The track is heavy, dramatic, emotional, epic, generally just a killer track, and the album doesn't get to that level again, obviously. The album made a huge impression on its release but has somewhat faded over time, so Absolution goes in at number 8. Then number 7 will be the debut album Showbiz, a fine collection of indie rock songs but no theme or concept tying the room together. This is a band filled with potential, and Matt's instantly recognisable falsetto and enthusiasm for making a racket with his guitar were already in evidence, and there are some delightful tracks sprinkled around this album. For example, the first Muse CD I ever bought was the eccentric single Muscle Museum, and I'm pretty sure it was seeing them play that live on TV that got me into the band in the first place. Also at the start of the album you've got Sunburn, which is all-time top 5 Muse. It's timelessly beautiful and a lot of that does come from the vocals, but then you've got the big rock centrepiece in the middle of the album, the title track Showbiz. Those 3 tracks alone are worth putting the album on for. I would say the Radiohead comparisons were at their most appropriate on this album, and it did share a producer with the Bends. In fact, one of the songs sounds like a Bend B-side to be honest, but there are other very enjoyable songs like Cave and Uno, so it was a striking debut that still retains a lot of charm. Showbiz at number 7. Then number 6 is The Resistance. This is another one I've kind of drifted away from over the years, a bit like Absolution, and it's a similar experience to that one because it starts strongly but then drops in the middle. But in this case we come back with the best part of the album, which is the 3-part Exogenesis Symphony, part 1 of which is all-time top 5 Muse and felt like it had the type of ambition that was commensurate with the talent of the band, and they should do more of, which in fairness they have. At the start of the album it's business as usual with another classic single, Uprising, with its Doctor Who influence, then the title track with its energetic and rousing chorus, but then Undisclosed Desires, which was the track that got me into this album and brought in some of the electronic sounds that would become more dominant on future works. United States of Eurasia and Guiding Light I don't like, and I think kill the mood and give me that pitch of a sag after the good opening. Guiding Light also lifts the drum pattern from Vienna by Ultravox, since we're picking out these references. Curiously, I'd also say The Resistance feels like a safe Muse album now we can look back and see it in the context of the whole catalogue, which Absolution also suffers from. So it's an uneven listen from my perspective, although there are several essential tracks in there and a big symphony at the end, all of which adds up to number 6. Get inside. Then number 5 is Drones, which is the complete opposite experience. This is one I didn't immediately take to, but I would argue is the biggest grower of the Muse catalogue. And the opening track, Dead Inside, is a microcosm of this, because on early spins I thought it was an okay song. I was probably a little bit distracted by how much it says like Radio Gaga by Queen, but at some point it just clicked, and now I think it's all-time top 5 Muse and a stunner frankly. And this track also wrung foot you to a degree because it's very electronic, whereas my general picture of the album is that it's quite guitar heavy and very actually heavy, especially for a mainstream band. And this is where the more recent productions make those early albums sound a little bit weak or even one-dimensional, because Drones sounds fantastic. The other track that flipped me was The Globalist at the end of the album, which does feel like a true climax and recalls to a degree the Exogenesis Symphony. Although this track isn't physically broken down, it is just an epic track constructed of various parts and movements with some nice chunky guitar in the middle, and the track The Aftermath before it almost feels like a fourth part leading in. And I guess I should also mention Psycho and Reapers, which are the big riffy crowd pleasers, although there is a trio of tracks after those that lack a spark that would put Drones higher up the list. So it does continue to mature with each passing year, but number 5 feels about right, especially considering the albums that are coming up. Number 4 is Black Holes and Revelations, which felt like the perfecting of the early Muse format with a grander and punchier sound, and it also contains Mapper of the Problematique, which is all-time top 5 Muse and is one of those rare tracks where the verse is more stimulating than the chorus. And again we open the album with a rather large stage setter with Take a Bow. Then it's Starlight, which felt like this album's version of Bliss from an album of which we have yet to speak. Then it's the delightfully bonkers Supermassive Black Hole, classic Muse mischief with the opening single, a bit like Plug-in Baby, which again is why I felt like Muse albums are starting to develop a formula at this point. I do think Soldier's Poem and Invincible are momentum killers, just like we had with The Resistance. Not sure if that opinion will get me bounced out of the circle, but those tracks back to back is why I'm keeping the album down at number 4. We then pick it up with some stronger material in the album's centre, but then again it goes a bit low key towards the end with City of Delusion and Hoodoo, but this leads to the big finish with Knights of Sidonia. Now I appreciate that track for what it is, but I never latched onto it in quite the way a lot of Muse fans seem to, and there's another healthy dose of even more Queen worship with the guitar slinging in a very Bohemian Rhapsody-esque fashion, but the point is that it's the overall effect of the album that made it such an enjoyable and generally impressive listen, and a good step up from Absolution, and we shan't forget that it holds a Mapper of the Problematique, so Black Holes and Revelations is in number 4. Then number 3 is The Second Law, which is a solid and consistent listen with no howlers, but the highlights aren't high enough to get this any higher up the list. I also think Supremacy, with its Led Zeppelin Cash Me motif, is one of the weaker openers. Not a bad song, but not a masterpiece out of the gate like other Muse albums seem to have. The experiments are still here, so we finish with the dubstep thump of Unsustainable, which feels entirely natural in context, and I also love that song. And just before that we have the bass player Chris's more straightforward rock song Liquid State, which adds a new texture to proceedings, and I also like that song as well. But the highlight is Panic Station, which is another one of those striking singles Muse do that bounces around your head for hours even after only one spin. My overall picture of The Second Law is that it's a warm and consistently enjoyable listen from start to finish, instead of having all the peaks and troughs like we sometimes get on other albums, and I think a track like Animals really helps with that because it's such a soothing and gentle moment around some of the more bombastic and quirkily catchy music that surrounds it. Okay, the lyrics on the Olympic song Survival are a little bit too on the nose, but that's a very minor issue on an otherwise fine piece of work. The Second Law at number 3. Number 2 is The Will of the People. Now this is still quite fresh, so there is very much a possibility of some recency bias, but number 2 feels correct. It would be irresponsible to put it any higher and a display of weak character to put it lower, because this is what I actually believe. And as I said, it's a genuinely fun record, and the heart of it is the Halloween song, which on first impressions may have been all-time top 5 Muse, but is certainly what triggered me to make the purchase. And I actually bought the album within a week of hearing it for the first time, and I was shocked by how much I was enjoying it. And here we've also got a Muse album where the second half might be the strongest. That's where the Halloween song is, which has got some fantastic vocal lines, and there's some truly satisfying guitar sounds around the solo. Muse might not get the credit for how great their guitars actually sound, and you get a lot of variation all over their albums. In fact, the next song, Kill or Be Killed, opens with a great guitar sound. In fact, it's pretty much a metal track with those riffs and the double kick drumming. In fact, you almost miss what a metal track it is because of Muse's fine touch and Matt Newon's vocals, but it's an amazing Muse track, which is part of a run of 4 massively varied but exceptionally enjoyable songs. That's from Ghosts to Verona, and that run is a huge influence on why this album is number 2. I will admit that I groaned when I saw the title of the final track. Now I don't curse on this channel, but it's called so I wasn't looking forward to it because I don't like that title, but it's another album highlight, and again, just so much fun. That's the word I keep coming back to. Back at the other end of the album, the opening track is the title track, and just as a change of pace, instead of a Queen reference, it's Marilyn Manson. The will of the people, the will of the people is just the beautiful people, followed by a big riff, and there's some other very beautiful people-esque guitar sounds around that song. And I also noticed just a hint of Disposable Teens around the chorus, which I don't think is a coincidence, but it's still a very big bouncy Muse song, and I actually don't have a bad word to say about this album. Maybe when it's aged we can reconsider its position, but for the moment Will of the People is in there at number 2, which means number 1 is Origin of Symmetry. To pick anything else would be an outrage. This was their second album, and after the first one, which we've all agreed was simply a collection of indie rock songs in the vein of early Radiohead, Origin of Symmetry established the band's identity and felt grander and more ambitious. And we've got a suite of top draw Muse songs like Newborn, which was an epic start to the album, Space Dementia, which was grandiose and really emphasised the classical influence, the Rachmaninoff influence. We've also got the first bouncy single with Plug-in Baby, and of course eternal fan favourite, the also epic Citizen Erased. And I guess everybody's rather fond of the cover of Feeling Good, but the song that put it over the top for me was Micro Cuts, which is all-time top 5 Muse. Nobody else is making that song, and I would say the vocals are still the wildest Matt's ever recorded. A true slice of genius Micro Cuts. Okay, maybe I wouldn't miss Dark Shines or even Screenager if they'd been excised, but the only serious concern is that we were already getting the feeling that the studio albums weren't quite capturing the magic of the live performances. The sound didn't quite have the power or the depth, and there is an X factor to the live performances that just can't be replicated in the studio, but that's more testament to Matt's skills as a performer than the full-time recorded work as a concept. But in any case, the release of Origin of Symmetry was the turning point for when Muse changed from being a band with potential to one of the best bands in the UK. Not quite overnight, but it was a very rapid ascent, and for all those reasons, Origin of Symmetry is the number 1 Muse album. And that's the end of the list, so I hope you liked it, I hope you learned something. As always, I will be back soon with more videos. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day.